Seasons are changing, summer has started to leave, autumn falls on us, and this is all brought in every year with the newest iPhone, this one being the iPhone 15 Pro. And this one has to be the most hyped phone that I'm struggling to like. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and today I have the newest iPhone that you should buy. Kind of. Let's get started. Now, I call this redesign instead of design for two reasons. For one, this is not a review of all the specs and stuff like that, though I might go over them at times. This video is for those that actually want to know what it's like using this phone. And sure, there might be some biases because after all, this is a review. If it wasn't biased, then it would be factual and it would be considered a report and probably something you would just read. The second meaning behind redesign is because this is one of the biggest iPhone redesigns in a long time. Kind of. With the front, nothing really changed from last year. Pretty much the same everything. People say that the bezel for the screen is different from last year, and sure, that's technically true, but what does that actually change? In a case, I don't really notice a difference between the iPhone 14 Pro, so realistically, that's an almost nothing burger. That said, here is an iPhone 14 Pro screen protector, not only proving that the glass is smaller, but also showing that Apple slightly curved the glass, again, because why? This is still essentially the same screen as the iPhone 14 Pro, being a 6.1-inch OLED panel that has ProMotion display or 120 Hz for the refresh rate. Same brightness at 1000 nits or double the iPhone 6s. I know that's an old phone, but I just wanted that 2 times brighter comparison. Since the iPhone 12 Pro, I don't really feel like brightness has been an issue. Plus, I don't use auto brightness, so it's never really reaching that 1000 nits for me anyway. It still is a beautiful screen that has ceramic shield, just like this iPhone 14 Pro Max. Gotta love those scratches. By the way, this video will be filled with iPhone 14 Pro comparisons because that just makes sense. We still get Notch Island and nothing really changed with that. You may say, yeah, but they added... No, they didn't. They didn't add any hardware, they just added software, which should be applied to the iPhone 14 Pro as well. The sides of the phone are new and annoying. See, I use this phone with a case, so why are there marks all over here? This is a coated titanium rail, yes, just like the Essential phone, but the biggest struggle is that this picks up fingerprints. The iPhone, however, picks up finger marks and oils. So sure, fingerprintless, I guess. It does feel good, and actually makes this phone the lightest Pro phone that Apple has ever made at 187 grams. Rejoice, but at what cost? Also, that's only 1 gram lighter than the iPhone 11 Pro. They ditched stainless steel for a titanium band that essentially bonded with aluminum to make the phone light and possibly less durable. At least the back is the same glass that we all love and hate, the former hating it for cracking. At least this year you can have the back glass replaced by Apple for $199, or an estimated $170 after a credit if you do it yourself when Apple decides to start selling you parts. Way too much for something that normally cost me less than $20. Also, the back glass is paired per se, but all you need to do is swap the wireless charging, which is super simple to do if you're already doing the back yourself. Water resistance is the same at up to 6 meters for 30 minutes, but be careful because that's a huge reason why the iPhone 13 Pro Max and 14 Pro Max screens go white or green like this. Also, one weird thing is that the iPhone 15 advertises color throughout the back glass, but the iPhone 15 Pro doesn't. And I can assume it's the same matte texture and coloring that we've seen for years on the Pro phones. It's odd that the non-Pro gets a cooler feature. Of course, we do get the action button, which is pretty customizable, allowing for silent mode, like normal, toggle a focus mode, open the camera to photo, selfie, video, etc. My favorite, a flashlight. Then we get the voice memo magnifier for those that can't really see, a shortcut feature which gives you infinite abilities, one of these accessibility modes, and then the one that Samsung S8 through S10 users were dying for, a toggle to do nothing. I'd also like to point out that this looks like they spent so much time designing this page, but then there's no reaction on the phone to show when the button is pressed. Almost like Apple forgot what the button is supposed to do in their little video. Either way, this can be toggled when the phone screen is on or off, which I enjoy. This is good for those that want to leave your phone indefinitely on mute, like myself, but now there's a little icon on the lock screen, which I find annoying because it's not on any other phone. With the color and titanium frame, we start to realize that this is different from the old and new iPhones. But we can't forget about the lackluster first generation USB-C port. Of course, this gives us USB 3 at 10 gigabits per second, which is technically labeled as USB 3.2 Gen 2 X1. This makes Apple sound kinda dumb simply saying 3, but saying the full name is annoying too, so it's a wash. I say first generation because this is not a perfect port. The iPad Air 4 has 5 gigabit speeds, while the Pro 11 first generation has 10 gigabit speeds like the iPhone 15 Pro. But why do both iPads power this drive while my iPhone fails to do so? It seems that anything that goes over 5 watts of power simply doesn't work with the iPhone. So you'll need to stick to some non-NVMe style drives, which is fine, I guess. Also wish that Apple gave us a headset jack adapter in the box because, USB-C. This doesn't really change much for charging. We still get 15 watts of MagSafe charging, which hasn't changed since they introduced that on the iPhone 12, besides getting Qi 2 support. As for wired, I'm seeing the same 23 watts that I got from my iPhone 13 Pro, so the only thing that the USB-C does is makes power bank charging work at 4.5 watts to another device and faster data transfer speeds. I would rather them boost the AirDrop speed though, because that's so much easier to do. I actually tested the import speeds via cable versus AirDrop, and it took 10 seconds for a 1GB video imported into Final Cut Pro, and 18 seconds for that to be sent through AirDrop. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure how that's anywhere near USB 3 speeds at 10 gigabits per second, if that's not even 1 gigabit per second. If it was truly 10 gigabits per second, it would take less than a second for that video. And that's pretty much it for the changes, and that was a little over 1,000 words just to say USB-C, titanium, and an action button. It is hard to commend Apple for making an iPhone that is easier to fix because cost isn't going down. They really created a problem and then fixed it because Right to Repair said so. Maybe in 10 years they'll stop serializing parts. Now don't worry, we'll talk about the cameras, but first we have to go over day-to-day usage. And let me be completely honest, this is an amazing phone. Is the battery good? Kind of, but for some reason it's less than what I would get from my 1-year-old iPhone 14 Pro. Does the phone get hot? Yes, this is a flagship after 2000, well, I don't really know when that started. I remember this being an issue when the iPhone 7 came out and maybe when the Samsung S6 came out. Phones get hot, and that's normal, and it also is something I complained about with my iPhone 13 Pro video, so I'm not exactly saying that it gets hot to follow trends. But what does that have to do with basic usage of the phone? Exactly, it doesn't. With the exception of photo editing and video recording, your phone will never get close to overheating unless you're actually using that phone for a long time. And even then, getting the message saying that the phone is too hot just won't pop up. All you're going to do is dim the screen. Think of every physical thing that you do, like jogging. Sure, jog for a minute and you're going to get some heat going. But when you start running, that's when you start to sweat because your body is literally trying to cool itself down. And that's what happens with these phones, except there's no external cooling. Also, with the roughly 10% performance increase from the 14 Pro to the 15 Pro, this isn't really anything new. Then we get the advances to the GPU, which is surprisingly in the middle of the A16 Bionic from the iPhone 14 Pro, and the M1 chip found in the MacBook Air and the iPad Air 5th generation. And for this 2x metric, this is 2 times faster than the iPhone 11 Pro Max, in benchmarks at least. All this really means is that your phone is going to be fast even though you don't need it to be. But secret time, so is the iPhone 14 Pro, also the iPhone 13 Pro, and even the iPhone 12 Pro, but there's something off with the 12 Pro. See, people may think that the A17 Pro chip in this iPhone 15 Pro is the fastest chip in any iPhone, and that's true. But real-world testing, which is what I do for this channel, has proven to me that of those 4 phones that I mentioned, only the 12 Pro is slow. Gotta love that 54-word run-on sentence. The speed difference is because the screen refresh rate sits at 60 Hz on the 12 series, while the 13 Pro and the 15 Pro have 120 Hz displays. It does not matter how much power you put into this phone, setting it to 60 Hz after seeing 120 Hz just messes with your brain. The fluidity is what causes us to think differently. Similar to how we perceive speed in real life. In an airplane, which I hope I have footage for, you feel like you're not moving at Mach 0.8 speed. Funny enough, you're actually going faster in the air than when you are lifting off the tarmac, but the tarmac feels faster. The reason why is because the closer you are to the ground, the more our brain thinks that we're moving fast. That's why sitting in your friend's beyond slow Miata feels faster than a bus going the same speed. Now for phones and refresh rates, this is confusing. See, the estimate that our eyes can perceive is about 30 to 60 frames per second, but that doesn't actually make sense when you can actually tell the difference in 60 to 120 Hz, assuming that's what your device is actually putting out. Even as I scroll through my computer, I can see that it outputs 100 to 119 frames per second, meaning that it's not fixed at 60 or 120 Hz for power savings, of course, but also because it's processing that image. It makes sense because we do notice those frame drops, meaning that devices don't sit at 120. I see this even on my phone dropping to 60 or 90 Hz fixed, or just lagging when it should be 120 Hz all the time. All of this to say that your phone may feel fast even though it isn't, but also feel slower even though it isn't. This is how Apple and many other companies get away with making their phones feel faster even though they aren't. Our brains like knowing that the screen is capable of 120 frames per second, even though it could be anywhere between 60 and 120 frames per second. It's like telling yourself you should taste the flavor in the food, even though it's not actually there. Or maybe I just get flavors of vanilla and cinnamon mixed up sometimes. I'm confused writing this review because I ultimately am telling you that there's not that much of a difference between the 13 Pro and the 15 Pro. That said, the cameras are drastically different, even if the specs don't say so. This year focuses on video capture, which is a mixed bag in my opinion. For the main sensor, we get a 48 megapixel camera that can capture 12 or 24 megapixel photos automatically, and 48 megapixels if you want to shoot RAW. You actually get 3 options, and the best part about this is it's an if you know sort of situation, which is difficult to say, but HEIF at 48 megapixels does seem weird considering that you're going to lose editing detail, I assume. The next camera is a 12 megapixel sensor that is a focusable ultra-wide camera. This feels the same as the iPhone 14 Pro, and probably is. The last sensor is a 12 megapixel 3x telephoto sensor, which I honestly love. Having used the 5x sensor in the Pixel 7 Pro, I can still appreciate the middle ground of reaching 3x, allowing for a 0.5, 1x, 2x, and 3x zoom optically, though 2x is sensor cropping. Would have liked to see a 48 megapixel telephoto so you can sensor crop into that 3x to get a 6x sensor crop shot, but it is what it is. Also, that 48 megapixel camera is huge, at least if we're going to compare it to the size of the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Shots are, as you would expect on an iPhone, in auto mode, slightly oversaturated, sharp, and clean looking. I gotta say though, night photography does have its moments, but also, does anyone think that night shots need an overhaul, or maybe a wider ISO range? Video definitely does. The auto portrait mode is cool, but also why isn't this in older phones? The iPhone 15 supports it, so the iPhone 14 Pro should support it as well because they are the same sensor. Just like the 24, 28, and 35mm button on the 1X button, which feels weird to switch to, but also weird since it's just cropping in on the sensor, so you're kind of stuck with that shot that you take. I feel like there should be a way to take all of those shots with a toggle, just like RAW mode. Maybe in the iPhone 16. Cinematic mode is still the same as the 14 Pro, but it's not bad at all. Kind of forgot about it, to be honest. It is strange that it only works on the main and front camera. Also, you can't shoot in ProRes for cinematic, but you can do it with regular video all the way up to 4K 60, all the way up to 4K 30 frames per second, just like last year. Of course, you can shoot 4K 60 ProRes, but you need an external source, which is kind of weird because you have the NVMe speed in your phone, but the slower mSATA drive is needed to record on. Maybe that's the real heat issue. Also, you can shoot directly onto an external drive. Very cool, but only in ProRes, not normal video. Another iPhone 16 feature? Again, we get 3 types of ProRes encoding, and again, it's an if you know situation. Personally, I get why people go with log, but HDR looks better in my eyes, even after color grading log. And yes, this does apply to the focusable front 12 megapixel camera, which can also shoot at 4K 60 in log. But enjoy some time with the camera. Also, I do have a separate video for log footage versus real camera. You should definitely go check that out if you haven't already. guess that's it for the camera. It was definitely shorter than I expected, but the main takeaway is that these cameras are the same or better than before. But for the features that make it worth upgrading from a Pro 13 or 14 series, I don't think any review would need to tell you that because you just know based on the specs. But for the average person, even the iPhone 13 Pro shoots some amazing videos and photos, even achieving ProRes at 4K 30 frames per second. I didn't realize this because I normally have lock camera on my iPhone, but on the iPhone 14 Pro, if you shoot 4K 60 frames per second, it doesn't actually allow you to switch cameras while you're filming. However, on the iPhone 15 Pro, it does now. Pretty cool, but I did see this on the Pixel 7 Pro, so it's kind of weird that it took this long to happen. I'm over 2,700 words in this review, which is a lot, and I still need to talk. It is strange to see because I mainly talk about how the iPhone of this year is so similar to last year and why you wouldn't want to buy it, with the exception of the 13 Pro's advances. That said, I know this video is going to be over 20 minutes, which is very long for the videos that I normally make. Why is it that there's so much to talk about when the new iPhone comes out, and I'm not the only one that ends up making longer videos for these phones? This has to prove that the iPhone 15 Pro is a special phone, just like previous iPhones. Don't get me wrong, this is an awesome phone, but at the $1,500 for this 1TB version, I feel like there are better options out there. That said, that technically is not true. The reason why is because when you make something so good, you're likely to make a sequel to that and then another, just like what just happened. Just like Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, it was perfect, and then we got a sequel that was so good, but technically just better, not a completely new product. I feel like the iPhone 11 Pro was a good start, 12 Pro was a nice refresh, and the 13 Pro perfected the Pro name, 100%. But then the 14 Pro was 105%, and the 15 Pro is 110%. I believe that's why the iPhone 15 Pro is not as well received as we all think it should, simply because people are already on the 13 or 14 Pro. But being able to record some video directly to a USB-C device, a durable-ish titanium frame, and a well-rounded software experience with iOS 17 are all big reasons why this phone is so special. Assume that everything besides iOS will be copied to an Android near you eventually, but for now, this is what makes the iPhone 15 Pro so special. I do wish that the always-on display was actually good though. This is still annoying. At the end of the day, the iPhone 15 Pro is worth buying if you have an older iPhone. Simply put, if you can get this phone for a couple $100s or less on an upgrade or trade-in, go for it. Also, look at this Apple compare page for your phone to see what you'll get versus your phone. Like the iPhone 13 Pro, 14 Pro, and 15 Pro, which are all very similar specs. From the iPhone 13 Pro, it's kind of a coin toss as I would value this upgrade to be a $200 to $300 upgrade. For the iPhone 14 Pro, more like a $100 upgrade, if that. USB-C and the titanium frame is cool, but day-to-day usage just really makes the upgrades feel pointless, especially when you throw in worse battery life. If you have an iPhone 12 series or older, this feels like a worthy upgrade, especially if companies are going to give you $800 off with trade-in. And if you have a non-Pro phone, I would say that this could be worth the upgrade regardless of the generation. The screen alone makes a huge difference. But should you listen to all the hype and hate that the iPhone 15 series is getting? No. The overheating is normal, like I said. I've noticed this with my iPhone 13 Pro, and I do remember seeing an article about someone getting burned from an iPhone 7 Plus, as well as some hissing noise that was associated with heavy usage. Phones get hot, and when you leave your phone in the car, it gets up to about 40 to 50 degrees Celsius. So that's nothing new. 60 degrees Celsius or higher, yeah, sure, call the fire department. Also, the bulging battery is awesome because people really think that this only happens on Samsung or Android phones, yet here's an iPhone 13 Pro Max with a white screen and a bloated battery. The titanium frame and back glass are kind of strange to me because there could be an argument that they're not as strong as before, but at the same time, just take care of your stuff. What we should complain about is how Apple made the focus distance on the camera terrible every year in favor for the macro mode on the ultra-wide. I'm not a fan of that at all. With all this said, I do have the iPhone 14 Pro and I'm going to follow my own recommendation, at least for now, and return this phone back to Apple. Like I said last year in my 14 Pro review, I would still have the iPhone 13 Pro if I didn't have this channel. USB-C just isn't worth it to me. And this concludes probably my longest video that I've ever made, the iPhone 15 Pro review. This video took me a long time to make. I can truthfully say I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, thanks for watching.